It's easy to believe that the problem lies in the people who don't value us. But the truth is, how we allow ourselves to be treated often begins with how we see ourselves. When you walk into a room unsure of your worth, you'll find yourself constantly trying to earn approval, win affection, or prove something to people who may never offer it. This doesn't mean you're less valuable. It just means you haven't yet rooted yourself in that truth deeply enough. The starting point isn't their recognition, it's your realization. The most powerful people in the world, those who are calm, centered, and unshaken, aren't necessarily those with the most accolades. They are the ones who have taken the time to understand who they are and what they bring, even when no one's clapping. Knowing your worth isn't arrogance, it's clarity. It's being aware of the values you stand on, the unique way you see the world, the kind of energy you bring into spaces, the quiet strength you offer even when it's not flashy. You don't have to shout your value for it to be real. In fact, the people who truly understand their worth are usually the quietest in the room, not because they're unsure, but because they have nothing to prove. They're not performing, they're not angling for favor. They're simply grounded. This grounding comes from an internal decision to stop outsourcing your value to others. Too often, we wait for someone else to validate our presence, a boss to approve our ideas, a partner to affirm our worth, a group to welcome us, and while those things feel good, they're not sustainable sources of identity, because the moment those people change their tone or walk away, we feel diminished. That's the danger of borrowed validation. It can be taken from you at any moment, but when you've done the work to root your confidence in something deeper, you're no longer shaken by their silence or rejection. And that work doesn't happen overnight. It's built slowly through reflection, consistency, and intention. It starts by identifying your values, not the ones that sound good, but the ones you truly live by. Honesty, creativity, loyalty, kindness, courage, whatever they are, name them clearly, because those values are the bedrock of your worth. Then begin to notice how you live them out. That time you stood up for someone. That idea you brought forward. That hard conversation you didn't avoid. These moments are your evidence, not to prove yourself to others, but to remind yourself of who you are. Self-worth also grows when we stop tying our identity to results alone. If you only feel valuable when you achieve something, you'll forever be chasing the next win. And people who don't value you will always have power over your peace. But if you begin to see your worth as something that precedes performance, as something intrinsic, you become more resilient. You stop apologizing for your presence. You stop over-explaining your choices. You start to make decisions that align with your values even if they're unpopular. That alignment is what creates true confidence, not the kind that flexes, but the kind that stands tall without needing attention. The moment you know your worth deeply is the moment your energy changes. You walk into rooms differently. You speak differently. You carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority. You're no longer looking for someone to pick you. You've already chosen yourself, and that energy is felt. People may not know why, but they sense something different. You no longer lean in to be seen. You lean back and let presence speak for itself. There will always be people who don't value you. Sometimes because of their own insecurities, sometimes because they don't recognize what they don't understand, and sometimes because they're simply not meant to walk closely with you. That doesn't mean you need to change to fit their mold. It means you need to become even more anchored in who you are. When you know your worth, you stop trying to convince others of it. You realize that not everyone needs to see you, believe in you, or support you, and that doesn't change your value. Ironically, the more rooted you become in your own worth, the more you attract people who reflect it back to you. Because people respond to energy, and self-respect creates a powerful kind of gravity. It signals that you're no longer available for disrespect, for manipulation, for crumbs of affection or appreciation. You're not angry, you're just clear, and clarity creates boundaries that don't need to be shouted. They're felt, and they protect you from environments that drain you. This is the secret. You don't get people to value you by demanding it. You get people to value you by embodying it, by knowing your worth so deeply that their approval becomes a bonus, not a necessity. When you reach that level of internal clarity, their absence no longer threatens you. You stop trying to convince them, you start aligning with people who already understand, and in doing so, you create a life rooted in peace, purpose, and real connection, not performance. One of the most exhausting things you can do is try to earn value from people who have already decided not to give it. You pour in time, effort, energy, hoping that one more act of kindness, one more display of competence, one more reason to like you will finally change their mind. But here's the truth. If someone doesn't see your value, no amount of proving will make them see it. Not because you're not worthy, but because their lens is broken. Their capacity to appreciate you is limited, and chasing their validation only places your self-worth into their hands. The more you chase, the more power you give away. Chasing validation is rooted in fear, fear of being unseen, unheard, unimportant. It's a natural instinct. We are wired to seek belonging, to desire affirmation. But when that desire becomes a need, and when that need is targeted at people who have no intention of honoring it, we begin to lose pieces of ourselves. Every compromise we make, every boundary we soften, every silence we hold to avoid rocking the boat, it all adds up. Slowly, we drift from authenticity into performance, and performance is exhausting. What we must understand is that we teach people how to treat us. When you tolerate behavior that devalues you, when you stay silent in the presence of disrespect, when you accept crumbs in the hope of getting the whole loaf someday, you signal that this is acceptable. And it's not your fault that some people treat others poorly, but it is your responsibility to decide how long you stay at a table where you're not truly invited. There's a profound difference between kindness and self-abandonment. One flows from strength, the other comes from fear. That's why boundaries are so important, not as punishment, but as protection. Boundaries are not walls designed to shut people out. They are standards designed to keep your peace intact. They're how you say, "I value myself enough not to shrink for your comfort." When you stop chasing validation and start building boundaries, your posture changes. You stop running after people. You start standing still. Not because you're indifferent, but because you've realized that your energy is sacred, and it should be invested where it is respected. Boundaries clarify the kind of treatment you are available for. They create a filter, not of judgment, but of alignment. You're not trying to be better than anyone. You're simply choosing environments that reflect the respect you already carry within. And yes, sometimes that means walking away. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. You're not giving up. You're letting go of what was never holding you in the first place. And let's be clear, boundaries are not always loud. Sometimes they are silent decisions. You stop responding to manipulation. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop showing up where your presence is taken for granted. These are quiet, powerful revolutions. They don't require confrontation. They require conviction, and that conviction must be rooted in a deep understanding of your own value. Because without that, boundaries feel like loss. With it, they feel like freedom. It's also important to understand that not everyone who fails to value you is malicious. Some people are simply operating from their own limitations, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They cannot offer you what they've never learned to give. That's not your burden to carry. Compassion is important, but it does not require self-sacrifice. You can love people from a distance. You can wish them well while choosing not to let them influence your sense of self. That's not coldness, it's wisdom. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. When you begin building boundaries instead of chasing approval, your relationships shift. Some people will fall away, let them. Others will step up, Let them too. You'll start to notice who's been around for your presence versus who's been around for your performance. That distinction is critical because your worth was never meant to be proven. It was meant to be recognized. And those who recognize it without being convinced are the ones you build with. They don't need you to hustle for attention. They honor your existence, not just your effort. This shift also allows you to reclaim your energy. The mental and emotional bandwidth you once used to analyze every word, every tone, every interaction, trying to decode if someone finally sees you, gets redirected into things that bring you peace and purpose. Your life starts to fill with alignment, and alignment brings a kind of rest that performance never can. There's a quiet power in no longer needing to be chosen by people who overlook you. There's freedom in knowing that you don't have to convince anyone of your worth. When you stop chasing and start choosing, everything changes. You choose where your energy flows. You choose who has access. You choose how to respond. And most of all, you choose to live from a place of grounded self-respect instead of constant external approval. That choice is not always easy, but it is always liberating. It takes maturity to recognize that not every person who fails to value you is doing so out of malice. Some people simply don't know how. Maybe they've never been taught how to recognize worth in others because they're still struggling to see it in themselves. Maybe they're so caught up in their own noise, their own insecurities, their own chaos, that they don't have the emotional capacity to acknowledge yours. It's tempting to personalize it, to assume their lack of affirmation means you're not enough. But more often than not, it has nothing to do with you at all. That's why it's critical to approach people with empathy, while still holding the line when respect is absent. When you lead with empathy, you take a step back and ask, what must this person be going through that makes it hard for them to give what they've never received? Empathy doesn't excuse poor treatment, but it explains it. And in that explanation, you gain perspective. You start to see that their inability to value you might stem from their own wounds, childhood rejection, internalized shame, fear of vulnerability. People who have never been seen often don't know how to see others. People who have never been taught to honor themselves often don't know how to honor you. And in understanding that, your resentment begins to loosen its grip. But empathy isn't the same as enabling. It doesn't mean you stay where you're mistreated. It doesn't mean you silence your needs for the sake of someone else's comfort. It means you acknowledge their humanity without compromising your own. You can care about someone's struggle and still remove yourself from their storm. You can understand why they are the way they are and still choose not to let them shape how you see yourself. That's where strength lies. Not in clinging to relationships that drain you, but in knowing when to love someone without losing yourself. There's a balance that must be struck between compassion and clarity. Compassion says, I see that you're hurting. Clarity says, but I will not let your hurt become mine. Compassion says, I know this is hard for you. Clarity says, but it's not my responsibility to carry your emotional weight. Leading with empathy doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It means being able to offer grace while still honoring your boundaries. That balance takes practice. It takes emotional intelligence. It takes the willingness to pause and ask, what's really going on here? Before reacting. The most centered people are the ones who can acknowledge complexity. They don't need to demonize others in order to protect themselves. They understand that someone can be both broken and lovable, both harmful and unaware. And yet, they make wise decisions about proximity. They don't confuse understanding with permission. Just because you understand someone's pain doesn't mean you have to absorb it. Just because you know they're trying doesn't mean you should settle for less than you deserve. Learning to lead with empathy also changes how you speak to yourself. When you begin to understand that people's treatment of you is often more about them than you, you stop internalizing every negative interaction. You stop making it mean something about your worth. That rejection, it wasn't a reflection of your inadequacy. It was a mirror of their limitation. that coldness, it wasn't because you did something wrong. It was because they weren't equipped to meet you where you are. And once you begin to separate your identity from their behavior, you free yourself from the need to constantly explain or defend. Empathy allows you to walk away without bitterness. When you recognize that some people are just not in a place to value you, whether temporarily or permanently, you can release the weight of trying to change them. You don't carry the burden of making them see you. You don't linger in spaces hoping that someday they'll come around. You simply accept that some people are not your assignment, not your responsibility, and not your people. That kind of clarity doesn't make you hard, it makes you whole. This mindset also prepares you to recognize when you are being valued. When you've spent too much time in environments where your worth was overlooked, being appreciated can feel unfamiliar. You might be tempted to distrust it, to sabotage it, or to shrink from it. But leading with empathy toward those who didn't value you helps you transition more gracefully into places where you are seen. You stop comparing. You stop replaying past narratives. You start accepting love with open hands instead of closed fists. Empathy helps you stay soft in a world that can be hard. It helps you show up with integrity even when others don't. But most importantly, it reminds you that value is not something others give you. It's something you bring with you. When you lead from that place, the behavior of others no longer defines your identity. It simply informs your boundaries. And you begin to live from a space of emotional freedom, where you can love deeply, lead wisely, and walk away peacefully. When needed, there's a distinct difference between simply being surrounded by people and being in the presence of those who truly reflect your worth back to you. The energy we keep close, our friendships, our partners, our coworkers, our mentors, has the power to shape how we see ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, and ultimately how we show up in the world. If you consistently find yourself in environments where you're second, guessing your value, questioning your voice, or feeling invisible, the issue may not be your worth. It may be your surroundings. We absorb the energy we're exposed to the most. That's why it's essential to be intentional about the people we allow into our inner circle. The right people don't just complement your efforts, they mirror your purpose. They see things in you that you've forgotten. They call you back to center when you've drifted. They remind you of your why when the world makes you question it. And they don't just show up when it's easy. They show up when it's uncomfortable. They hold space for your struggle without diminishing your strength. These are the people who reflect value without needing to be convinced of it. They don't need you to explain your worth because they already recognize it. It's easy to settle for connection based on history, convenience, or proximity. But longevity doesn't always equal alignment. Just because someone has been in your life for years doesn't mean they're helping you grow. Some relationships hold you in the version of yourself you've outgrown. Some friendships only thrive when you're struggling, because your success threatens their sense of self. And some people only know how to connect through competition or comparison. Those aren't reflections of your value. They're reflections of the limits of the relationship. To surround yourself with people who reflect your worth, you have to be willing to get clear on what you stand for. What are your non-negotiables? What kind of energy do you want to build with? What kind of conversations nourish your soul? When you know the answers to those questions, you stop clinging to relationships that run on familiarity instead of purpose. You stop explaining your standards to people who mock them, and you stop shrinking your light to keep others comfortable in their shadows. That's not cruelty. It's stewardship of your own growth. You'll know you're around the right people when being yourself doesn't feel like a risk. When you can share your wins without worrying about being seen as arrogant. When your vulnerability is met with empathy, not judgment. When your ideas are encouraged, not dismissed. These aren't luxuries, they are necessities. Because your environment either fuels your purpose or fractures it. It either lifts your confidence or slowly chips away at it. Every interaction adds to or subtracts from your internal narrative. And when you're constantly surrounded by people who don't see you, eventually, you begin to stop seeing yourself. That's why it's not enough to cut off toxic people. You have to also intentionally build with people who are emotionally mature, growth-minded, and grounded in values that align with yours. People who don't just say they support you, but actually make room for your evolution. People who won't get jealous when you rise, who won't disappear when you struggle, who won't gossip when you're not in the room. These are the people who reflect your worth not just in their words, but in how they treat you when you have nothing to offer. Because real respect isn't transactional, it's rooted in recognition. This doesn't mean you need a large circle. In fact, the smaller and more aligned your community, the more powerful it becomes. Depth always matters more than width. One person who truly sees you is more impactful than 100 who only tolerate you. Choose presence over popularity. Choose alignment over attachment. Because when your energy is matched by others who honor it, you move differently. You create differently. You lead differently. You rest more peacefully. You rise more steadily. And you stop searching for external approval because your community becomes an echo of the truth you already believe about yourself. But this kind of environment isn't stumbled into. It's curated with intention. You attract who you are ready for. When you walk in your value consistently, you begin to notice who rises to meet you there. And you also become more comfortable releasing those who don't, not with resentment, but with peace, because you understand that the more you honor your value, the less available you become to anything that dishonors it. You don't try to fix people to make them fit. You trust that the right people will arrive without needing to be reshaped. In time, your life becomes a reflection of the worth you've embraced internally and protected externally. The rooms you walk into feel different. The conversations you engage in shift. You're no longer performing. You're participating. You're no longer hustling for love, you're receiving it. And most importantly, you're no longer settling for being tolerated. You're seeking to be celebrated, not for ego's sake, but because the value you carry deserves to be mirrored by the space you're in and the people you walk with.